Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. How are you doing? I do hope you're doing remarkably well. I'm doing great, thank you very much, and I'm so delighted you've joined me for a fabulous story tonight. And go and get yourself something lovely to drink. And I do love hearing from you, so don't forget to leave a comment. So let's get started with tonight's story. Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners. It was a dark night in 1982 when I climbed out of my brother's Buick Riviera, which my father bought him on his 21st birthday. I'll never forget when he said, "Clayton, son, I've got something to show you. Come with me, will you?" My father had an unreadable expression on his face, but there was a mysterious, rather mischievous glint in his eyes. When my father's brown eyes twinkled like that, I knew he had something terribly exciting up his sleeve, and he never would disappoint. My father was one of the most generous people I've ever known, who would give $100 to a perfect stranger without batting an eyelid. Something my mother found completely infuriating, as she was the kind of prudent, overcautious woman that counted the pennies and agonized about parting with her cash, even though my father made a very good living. It was as if she was terribly afraid that if she didn't hold on to the money as tightly as she could, she might wake up one morning and it would all be gone, mysteriously having vaporized like the smoke from a chimney. I think my mother had financial hang-ups from the past, where she'd grown up in tough circumstances, in a small little home in the Appalachian Mountains, with over 6 sisters and 4 brothers, in bleak, rather austere circumstances that were far from financially favourable. As a little girl, she'd literally lived on corn and potatoes, as money was so tight. She was 8 years old when she owned her first pair of shoes. I think the indelible influences of those hard times had rubbed off on her and had stuck to her like chewing gum under a school desk, and was hard to shake off. Hence she still considered herself impoverished and could not escape the inbuilt poverty mindset that seemed to dominate her life. It's a little like an overweight person, I suspect, who loses all the weight but still believes they're fat, and cannot see that they've shed that weight. I think my father, when he first met my mother, fell in love with her because she was such a forlorn, sorry sight, like a bedraggled, half-drowned kitten you found on the side of the road that desperately needed saving, and my father had always enjoyed rescuing people. I suspect that was part of his attraction to my mother, a woman whom he could save. When he was in his early 20s, my father worked as a fireman for a while and saved several people from burning to death, even when he was told it was far too dangerous to enter 1 or 2 of those houses. My father was stubbornly intent on saving their lives, come what may. He didn't even stop to consider his own safety. In my mother's case, she was a young woman struggling to survive and keep a roof over her head on a minimum wage. My mother had been waiting tables at a local diner when my father met her on a trip to the Appalachian Mountains. When she took him back to her threadbare apartment after their dinner date for a coffee, my father's heart broke when he saw the dreadful, sad conditions she was living in. The first thing he said to her was, "You can't possibly live like this. Why don't you live at my farmhouse in the Blue Ridge Mountains?" which was 550 miles away from Nashville, "with no strings attached, of course. And I'll pay you to take care of our stable block. Do you know anything about mucking out stables?" "I can learn," my mother had told him resolutely. He had been the perfect gentleman towards her, and she had lived at our farmhouse for over a year, before they both fell in love, and then she never moved out. My mother always described my father as her knight in shining armour, for he had rescued her from a lifestyle that had strangled all her hopes. "Come with me, son," my father insisted. "I've got something to show you." Me and my mother and my brother obediently trailed behind my dad, out of our white stone and brick double-storey farmhouse, with its grey slate roof, large sashed windows, pale blue shutters, and a huge wraparound porch that hugged the front of the house and overlooked spectacular views of the countryside. The farmhouse had been in our family for over 3 generations, and had those classical Georgian features. There was also 3 large oak trees that fringed the rear of the house, and their sculptural boughs were boasting a plethora of fresh green leaves to announce the prompt arrival of spring. I was curious as to where my father was taking us. We were all wearing jeans, sweaters and boots, and we crushed the gravel beneath our feet as we trotted past some of our free-range hens that were pecking the ground for worms and clucking away happily. I've always enjoyed owning chickens, especially seeing them on the farm, as their hearty, carefree presence makes you want to celebrate all the rich rewards of country life. It was a pretty crisp but fresh morning, and the Blue Ridge Mountains left their stunning, curvaceous signature on the horizon, but they were covered with a deep veil of undulating mist. There was a slight little nip in the air. Even though the winter days were behind us, the mornings and evenings could be decidedly chilly, if not cold. I glanced around at the countryside, marvelling how only in a matter of days the bleached yellow-coloured grass had become significantly greener, and our meadows, scattered with a plethora of rocky outcrops that intrusively poked through the ground like sea lions on a beach, were dappled with a colourful upholstering of pink, purple and yellow alpine flowers, while several of our dogwood and magnolia trees were now showing off a bedazzling confetti of ethereal blossoms. I had suspicions that my father might have brought my brother a puppy, that he was surreptitiously hiding away in the barn. As I sneakily suspected, my dad was indeed leading us directly to the Red Barn. I could feel excitement welling up in my chest, as I anticipated very eagerly that my father must have indeed brought my brother the Pyrenees mountain dog he'd been begging my father for his 21st birthday. And as a huge animal lover myself, another furry addition in the family could only ever be a good thing. I knew my father had a heart on him so big that I couldn't see him refusing my brother his ardent request. We had one Irish wolfhound at the time called Cracker, named such as he had a sparkling personality, and an English bulldog called Churchill, as he had a rather distinguished debonair look about him. I could almost imagine him sitting there on an upholstered leather couch with a cigar in his mouth, looking incredibly pompous and self-entitled. Both dogs were zealously trotting ahead of us, with their noses pinned to the ground, as they savoured the rich earthen scents of the countryside that the morning so graciously invited. Perhaps they could smell last night's scent signatures from our nocturnal visitors, of which we have many visiting our farm, from foxes to raccoons and anything in between. They were both furiously wagging their tails, and although Churchill's little stubby tail had its limitations, it was aerobically moving as eagerly as a sail in the wind. Both dogs were emitting a cluster of excited barks, as they could sense something was up. They obviously picked up on our ebullient mood. I'm sure my brother at this point was pretty certain he was about to receive his puppy. I could see the corners of his lips twitching in excited anticipation, and I didn't blame him. I was almost as excited as he was, possibly even more. To my surprise, my dad did not open the barn door, as I had been expecting. I envisaged him taking us over to a little cardboard box with a bright ribbon on the side, and my brother would peer inside the box, and there would be the most adorable white fluffy puppy dog lying on a blanket, staring at us through black eyes. Instead, my father beckoned us to move behind the barn. There it was, a black Buick, parked there over a patch of grass, hidden from view of the farmhouse, with a big red bow around the middle, and a happy birthday written on the side of the car in shaving foam. I gasped in astonishment. This I had not been expecting to see. My brother had begged my father to buy him a car for his 21st birthday, but my parents told him point blank it was never ever going to happen. But they had not said no to his request for a Pyrenees mountain dog, so it was the latter that I was instinctively expecting him to receive, most certainly not the former. "You will buy a car for yourself one day," my mother had told him, in a firm, no-nonsense tone of voice that we had learnt over the years never ever to challenge. My brother then was resigned to the fact that if he wanted a car, he'd have to borrow my father's car once in a while, or save up incredibly hard for a second-hand car of his own. My father pulled out a pair of keys from the pocket of his caramel-coloured chinos, and he threw them to my brother, who caught them in his hands. "It's yours, son," my father said. "Happy birthday, sport. You don't turn 21 every day, do you? I wanted to give you something extra special to celebrate this occasion, something I think you will really appreciate.
When I was 21, I wanted a car more than anything in the world, but my dream was never fulfilled. But I thought I could make yours happen for you."
My brother looked bewildered, as if he was so bemused by what he was seeing. He rubbed his eyes and looked at my dad in abject disbelief, with a mouth that was so wide it was virtually hanging on the ground. I think my expression was likely much the same, as I remembered staring at the car, hardly being able to believe what I was seeing. My father had bought for my brother something that he had wanted so very badly, and I hasten to say I was a tad jealous. But I reasoned with myself that if my dad had bought my brother a car, he would likely do the same for me when I turned 21 years old. But I still had 3 years to go, and that seemed like a hell of a long wait that would require extreme patience on my part.
"But I don't understand, Dad," said my brother. I thought you said something about you couldn't get me a car."
My mother, who'd grown up in an environment where gifts were few and far between, as money was in short supply, believed you should never spoil your children, as it turned them into self-entitled brats, and she was shaking her head furiously.
"I thought we discussed this, Errol, between the two of us," she said indignantly. "How much did this car cost us?"
I realized in that moment that my father's impulsive, extravagant, generous purchase on my brother's behalf had certainly not passed with my mother's approval. She was shaking her short mane of strawberry blonde curls defiantly, and was far from pleased. She glared at my father with a fiery look in her eyes that looked dangerously threatening.
"Errol, we agreed that Clayton should save up to buy himself a car, but you've broken our agreement and gone and bought him one behind my back. And how could you do this? This is incredibly extravagant."
My mother frowned, continuing to give my father a wide, disapproving glare. But my father's feathers remained unruffled. He was basking in the pleasure of watching his son receive such an amazing gift, and enjoying his reaction. My brother's face lit up like a Christmas tree.
"Is this for real, Dad? I mean, this thing is brand new. It's never even been used. Is this for real?" "I think it's possibly real, son," said my father teasingly. "Or otherwise I'm seeing a Buick that is not really there," he chuckled.
My brother ran over to my father impulsively, throwing his arms around him to give him a huge hug.
"Dad, I don't know what to say. Thank you so much. You have no idea how much this means to me." "Oh, but I think I do, son. I think I have a very good idea. I might be getting older, but I haven't forgotten what it was like to be 21 years old, dreaming of getting my car. And it's a privilege and honor for me to make one of your dreams come true. That's what a father is here for, not only to discipline his son, but to please his son. And I'm very happy you're delighted."
My mother groaned, rolling her hazel brown eyes in the back of her head. She knew my father had a marshmallow heart. That was one of the reasons why she loved him so much, although she'd never admit it.
"Who wants to come for a ride in my brand new car?"
my brother asked us, with a big grin on his face. Me and my father did not need to be asked twice. We ran hurriedly to the car, getting into the seats, while my mother watched us leaving, all the while shaking her head belligerently. I knew my father would be given the 3rd degree when he got back to the house, so he suggested my brother drove us to town so he could buy my mother a great big bouquet of flowers to appease her defiance. It would seem from the moment my brother got his brand new Buick, he just couldn't get enough of it. It had become his favourite new toy, but then again, it was an amazing gift. Now here I was several nights later, after the advent of my brother receiving his fabulous new car, wondering why I'd agreed to come with him on this night drive. This was insane. The trouble was my brother was so excited to have this new Buick in his life. It would seem that any excuse to go out for a drive, and my brother was game for it, even if it was the most objectionable hour of the night. Ostensibly, my brother Clayton would spend a copious amount of time at his best friend Edwin Rosenberger's ranch, and then he would return home at ludicrously insane hours of the night or morning, without any apology, as if he was a raging insomniac, which I rather suspect he was. My parents didn't appear to mind my brother engaging in all this independent nocturnal activity with his very best friend, as they felt he was old and ugly enough to be self-reliant, given he was a young man who had come of age, with his own form of transportation. Edwin Rosenberger, much like my brother, never seemed to need much sleep. They were like two peas in a pod in that regard, and they both looked uncannily alike. It was almost impossible to believe that they weren't brothers, or at the very least related. But my mother emphatically believed that if you hung around with someone long enough, their influences could rub off on you in an indelible way. Whether that is true or not, I don't know. But both Edwin and my brother Clayton boasted short-cropped chestnut brown hair, similar hairstyles, light hazel eyes, long faces with slightly large distinguished noses, and were lean and athletic-looking and just under 6 foot tall. I can say unequivocally that if the boot were on the other foot and I was to go gallivanting around the countryside at such ungodly hours of the night, my parents would not be best pleased. They seemed to think Clayton could enviably do what the hell he liked, without any recriminations. So what was good for the goose was clearly not good for the gander. My parents made that painfully clear, and would patronizingly say things to me like, "Fiona, you need to go to bed early. You need your beauty sleep, and you need that brain to be bright and fresh. If you want to do well in your studies, don't you? You're a young lady. It's not appropriate for you to be out and about late at night." Minutes before I'd agreed to come out on this drive, I'd been very contentedly lying fast asleep in my comfortable bed, and the next thing I knew was that my brother was shaking me excitedly, with an urgent determination. I'm not the kind of person that appreciates being woken up at the dead of night, and on this occasion I was terribly sleepy. "Fiona, wake up! Wake up!" came my brother's excited voice. "Fiona, you've got to wake up! Something quite wonderful has happened." "Go away!" I grumbled. "I'm trying to sleep, Clayton. Leave me alone." I was immune to my brother's ebullience, as my biological needs to sleep far outweighed my desire to appease my brother. Besides, I never really wanted to appease him anyway. "Fiona, listen to me. Listen to me. I've just seen the most brilliant white owl on one of the back roads, not far from the Rosenberger ranch. This owl, Fiona, it was spectacular. I've never seen anything like it before. It was one of a kind. I know how you love owls. If you get dressed quickly, I can take you to the spot where I saw it. It's the most gorgeous big white owl, perched on a tree branch. But this, Fiona, was the hugest owl I've ever seen. It was massive, with incredible yellow eyes. You'll be in awe of it, Fiona, I promise you. You will not be disappointed. Why don't we go and see it? See if we can find it. I saw it only 5 minutes ago. I'm sure it's still there." The word owl literally made my eyes pop open wide like a packet of Doritos. Owl was a magical word that always got my immediate attention, like the secret password of a computer that makes it suddenly spring into action. "You saw a big white owl?" I asked excitedly, staring at my brother through bleary eyes, congealed with sleep. "Where? When?" "Only moments ago, as I was driving back from the Rosenberger ranch." "But are you sure that we'll actually see it? Supposing it's actually flown off?" "I've seen it before, Fiona. It was perched on exactly the same naked branch, overlooking the edge of the road. It's a distinctive tree. I know where it is. I want you to see it. It's the most beautiful owl I've ever seen in my life. It's massive. Hurry, put your sweater on over your pajamas and some sneakers on your feet, and let's get going. But for God's sake, keep quiet. Mum will do her nut if she thinks I'm driving you around at 2 a.m. in the morning." "Is that the time?" I gasped, not needing any encouragement to get moving. I wiped the fragments of sleep away from my eyes and rose hurriedly to my feet, with a spring to my step, making a beeline for my closet. I knew I'd need to put on a sweater. I'd likely be cold out there. "What the hell do you do at Edwin Rosenberger's farmhouse?" I asked incredulously. "Don't you ever get a wink of sleep? What's wrong with the both of you?
It's so late. I can't believe you don't feel like a bear with a sore head when you have no sleep like you do." "I think we're not tired," said my brother. "We hang out, drink a few beers, listen to music, play darts and card games, that kind of thing. Now are you coming? If you keep dawdling like this, we might not see the owl. Remember, it's a wild bird. It's not going to be waiting for you." My heart was flapping with excitement, as if thousands of pigeons were inside my chest. My brother had described a large white owl, the likes of such he'd never ever seen before. I needed to see this for myself. I was so intrigued, so I quickly got dressed, put on my sneakers on my feet as my brother had wisely instructed. I discreetly tiptoed down the old creaking staircase in our home. I was following my brother, who was constantly indicating for me to be quiet. Once we were on the lower landing, we ambled silently past the passage, bypassing the kitchen towards the front door. Our 2 dogs, who slept in their baskets in the kitchen, were barking loudly, as they had sensed the activity in the entrance hall. My parents would probably think that my brother was up and about, having returned from one of his nightly soirees, and would hopefully ignore the barking. My brother pulled his front door keys out of his pocket, inserting them into the lock, steadily turning the key. He opened our pale blue front door, which groaned awkwardly as we prized it open. It was hardly surprising that the door was so noisy. It was 100 years old, after all. It was entitled to be a wee bit cranky. I was met with blasts of icy cold air that cruelly slapped my cheeks. I was wearing a puffer jacket over my sweater. Spring may have arrived, but winter had not quite relinquished its austere hold over the landscape. The ground was peppered with morning dew. We trotted towards the open carport, and before I knew it I was sitting on my brother's passenger-side seat, in the Buick, wondering if the white owl had any idea about the excitement it had aroused in me. I could only hope that it had not flown away. I'd have to keep my fingers crossed. Ever since I was knee-high to a grasshopper, I had a fixation over owls. People had given me fluffy toys, knitted water bottles, key rings, necklaces, brooches, books, posters, aprons, and even sweaters with owls on them, because I had loved them so much. It was ridiculous to be out and about at this late hour, in the faint, rather far-fetched hope of spotting the mysterious white owl my brother claimed to have seen. But I really wanted to see it. All my life I had nurtured a great fear of the dark, and here I was embracing it as if it was my new best friend. Growing up, I'd been so intimidated by the late night hours that stole all the light, inviting tenebrific shadows to pounce over my bedroom walls, stirring my imagination like the syrupy spells in a witch's cauldron, with outlandish suggestions of outer-worldly beings that I did not want to entertain. Indeed, it had been such a botheration to me. I had been forced to sleep with a night-light on, as it reduced my fear exponentially. My well-informed grandfather used to tell us that there were strange, idiosyncratic, cryptid creatures roaming around the Blue Ridge Mountains. I had seen the sincere earnestness in his eyes when he spoke of such things. I knew his solemn words were not said in jest, for they were spoken with a pronounced intensity. Now those sobering words took on a life-force of their own, as if they had suddenly grown wings, as they came flashing into my mind, like bright red warning lights. At this godless hour, your mind can mercilessly tease you with all kinds of insidious, macabre suggestions, rooted in one's darkest nightmares, seeded from a fertile imagination. By all accounts, when the dark shadows cast their morbid gloom over everything, it's impossible not to engage your thoughts of the living dead, monsters, headless horsemen, and God knows what else, as my fanciful mind was as ripe with blossom, like the trees in spring. My brother's Buick rattled down the remote sequestered roads, covered with stones and nasty gashes. It rattled precariously. The tenebrific Inkian firmament swaddled my brother's car from every side, closing in on us like a suffocating hand around your neck, squeezing the air out of your lungs. I don't mind admitting that it was a menacing, inauspicious night. The velvety blackness was blistered by only a faint scattering of moonlight, and beyond the headlights of my brother's car, it felt as if we were driving through a dark abyss, or a long, uncongenial tunnel, devoid of any illumination. My brother seemed blindly oblivious to all this. On the contrary, his face appeared to be animated. I could not believe he was not remotely overwhelmed by the hauntingly dark landscape that smothered everything in squid ink. The trees on one side of the road looked ambiguously lofty, giants with gnarled arms that could reach out and grab you. My brother's indifferent nonchalance eased my growing discomfort, and when he suddenly put the music on, somehow my mood managed to lift. Everything was a lot better and far more reassuring when the music was playing. I tapped my feet to the beats, and Boy George from Culture Club's upbeat voice seemed to vanquish the heavy feelings that had taken up temporary residence in my heart. "It's so dark out here," I said nervously, glancing out of my passenger side window. My brother laughed.
What do you expect, Fiona? It's past 2 in the morning. Of course it's dark. We don't have any street lights around here. And the moonlight is pitiful tonight, which is why it appears so bleak. All the ghosts and ghoulies are out at this time," he said teasingly, making his voice sound creepy.
If he was trying to scare me, he was seriously succeeding.
"We might even see the ghost of Raymond Seymour. Who knows?" he teased,
letting out a loud, mocking, condescending laugh. Ha ha ha! My brother didn't believe in the existence of ghosts, but it always gave him a macabre pleasure, or morose satisfaction if you like, to try and scare his very impressionable, gullible, easily persuaded younger sister. He could be callously cruel like that, or for his own personal entertainment or gratification. But anyone who's had brothers can understand how they like to toy with you sometimes, like a cat with a mouse. "Don't talk like that," I said, chills running down my spine. "For God's sake, don't scare me, or I'll insist you drive me straight back home. And I won't take no for an answer. I'm being serious, Clayton. Don't you dare scare me. You seem immune to how freakingly scary it is out here. Anything could be out there in those trees, watching us." Over the years there had been a few sightings of a ghostly spectre riding a black horse down the mountain roads. Mr. Weatherby, a good friend of my father's, claimed to have seen the ghost of Raymond Seymour, who'd been one of those highway robbers from the 1800s.
"I saw a very dense black silhouette moving towards me. It was the shape of a horse and rider, and then they stopped only feet away from my car. I saw the black horse very clearly. Its rider was wearing a scarf under his eyes, so that it covered his face, so all I could see were those piercing dark eyes drilling through me. I felt as if all the blood had drained away from my body, as I stared at this bleak, outer-worldly scene before my eyes. The horse rider sat on his horse, staring and staring at me, and then he turned around and galloped away. But for a moment I felt that evil energy cloaking me like a thick, dark veil. It was like nothing I have ever experienced before or since. I was trembling so much I could barely drive home. I knew I'd seen the apparition of Raymond Seymour, and I realized the rumours of his ghostly spectre weren't speculation, because he is indeed roaming the countryside, and the rumours are true. My brother chuckled. "Oh, for God's sake, Fiona, you don't buy into the story of Raymond Seymour, do you? I'm quite sure it's just a legend, and legends are just that. They're not true."
"No, it's not a legend," I hissed. "I was there, remember, when Mr. Weatherby told the story to Dad about the ghost of Raymond Sinclair? I knew he wasn't making it up. When he told us about it, his top lip was quivering, his brow was sweating profusely, and he was shaking like a leaf. That doesn't happen if you're making up a fictitious story. I could read his body language. Besides, his wife Kathy told me that he was a gibbering wreck for days after the event, and refused to drive at night for a long time afterwards. He was on anti-anxiety medication, I believe."
"Fiona, relax. You're getting very heated about this. It's easy to see things when it's dark. You know that very well. Think about yourself, for example. You have always been afraid of the dark shadows. Even now you are, especially in your room when you were a little girl. Mr. Weatherby could have been seeing things. Remember, it was late at night, early in the morning, you could say. He was tired. The imagination can be cruel at the very best of times. You know that. My guess is maybe he thinks he saw the ghost. But you know what Mr. Weatherby is like. He's inclined to drink a tad too much. And when you're drunk, you can sometimes see things that aren't actually there.
I believe him. And so does Kathy, his wife. You know Dad is a skeptic like you are, but he says Mr. Weatherby's account has given him pause for thought. He doesn't believe for a single second that Mr. Weatherby made this up. Dad says he's known Mr. Weatherby since he was 7 years old. He lacks imagination and is the most straightforward, truthful man you could ever hope to meet. So put that in your pipe and smoke it, Clayton.
Ah, is that what this is about? My word, sis, you've certainly got a bee in your bonnet over this.
I'm just sick and tired of your cynicism, Clayton. You're one of those people that will never believe a word anyone says, or anything that's cryptic, unless you see it for yourself. You don't give people the benefit of the doubt, do you? Now where is that owl you claim to have seen? So there we are. That is the end of part 1. Part 2 is tomorrow night, and I look forward to you joining me then. Until next time, goodbye and good night.